Great to see you, Ian. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. We were very keen to talk to you about your recent experience at Acuity Knowledge Partners, and having played a significant role in a very, very successful exit recently, having sold the business to Permira. I believe that this was your first private equity exit as a CFO. And therefore, from our perspective, we're really fascinated to understand a bit more about your experiences and how you found that whole process, having not done it before. So I'll hand over to you, but maybe if you just start with a little bit of background on yourself and Acuity and the situation that you joined the business in, that would be fantastic.
Yes, sure, Mark. Happy to help and good to chat. So, look, I'm a qualified chartered accountant with Price Waterhouse. I've spent 20 years working in investment banking. I worked internationally and I left banking in 2015. And over the last 8 years, I've worked in the corporate world. So, as you said, private equity exit, which took place on Jan 27. I'd been in the seat as the CFO for circa 2 years, and it was my first role as a CFO within the private equity space. So, prior to Acuity, I had worked within private equity, but not as a number one, which was a very different dynamic. So I worked at LeasePlan, who are the largest automotive leasing business in the world. And I was the CFO for the UK division, which was the largest of the divisions globally, but there were 33 divisions headquartered in the Netherlands. The Netherlands had the primary contact with the private equity house, and mine was very limited. So Acuity are the leading provider of high-value research and data analytics to financial institutions. So we have circa 500 financial institutions as our customers, household names, the vast majority of them. Those customers are segmented across 8 different business units. Buy side, sell side, they're investment banks, credit institutions, private equity houses, hedge funds. We have circa 6,000 people globally. The people that are working on our customer mandates are largely in India, Sri Lanka, Costa Rica, and China. And our sales functions are in the UK, also in multiple places in the States. We have a sales presence in Hong Kong, in Toronto, in Sydney, and Dubai.
Ian, from when you joined the business, I'm interested to understand how quickly did you start to move into potential prepping the organisation for a sale?
It was about 12 months is the answer to that, Mark. So I joined in May of 21 and we started the prep for the sale in June of 22. Now, the business had been and continues to perform exceptionally well. So to put that into perspective, the EBITDA of the business has grown by circa 300% from November 19 to the end of 22. So, we always, even when I joined, I thought that the exit may happen in relatively short order just because of the success of the business. And, there was quite a lot of interest in the company anyway. But we didn't start preparing in earnest until June of last year.
No, thank you. And maybe also interesting to understand, the background of the business. This was actually a carve out from Moody's, wasn't it? So I would have thought there was a huge amount of sort of transformational work that was needed even prior to prepping for exit.
Well, that's correct. And I would say that a large part of that was done prior to me joining. So, it was very sad circumstances, actually, me even starting the role, and then my predecessor died of COVID. So I joined mid-cycle, but, he had done a very good job of that with the team, of that integration. That being said, there still were, various parts of finance that needed to be strengthened. Because historically they had been done by the corporate function. So, they didn't exist as a standalone within Acuity.
And just talk to us about the exit process itself. I believe that maybe from start to finish, it took around 7 months. Talk to us a little bit more about that whole process?
Well, look, it started in the summer with two vendor assist pieces of work that we did, which went on for, well, one of them for nearly 3 months, the other for about a month. And vendor assist is basically us preparing really around two things. Firstly was around tax. So it was looking at our tax exposure, our tax risks globally, and anything that we could do to mitigate anything that was highlighted within those reports. There were things that I wasn't necessarily aware of at the start of this journey that would be a relatively big part of, for instance, the financial reports, such as run rate EBITDA and the importance of that going through this process. So there was things that I suppose when I started the journey I wasn't aware that would be required.
Yeah.
But once we'd completed all the reports, we then worked on a high level deck that we provided to a limited number of buyers that we'd had inbound interest from. Having
not done this full process up until now, what do you think from your past experiences has allowed you to be able to manage this process and be successful?
I'd say a number of things, right? Having someone like Richard, who I could bounce ideas off, discuss things with, and I would, as we're going through this process, I'd speak to him every week. But, I'd say most importantly, discussing with him what's next, because what's next is something I didn't necessarily know. So what was in front of me was relatively easy to deal with, but I would say also Equistone were very supportive throughout the whole process. So was the chairman of Acuity. Both of them said that I could use them as a sounding board and ask them questions on anything that I didn't understand. So also a very important part of the exit process was having the right team in place, and that's where Drax had a very important part to play. So, if I go back to the middle of 21 when I started, I had a team entirely offshore, no one in the UK. So I worked closely with Drax to firstly make sure they understood the business, but then make sure that they could source quality people in the market that could come in and add value straight away in the exit process. And what ultimately happened is we brought in a long-term structuring change within the business, but also that would add value going through this process. And it was people with specific private equity experience that have been through this process before. What
have you learned? Difficult question, but is there anything you would have done differently looking back now?
What would I do differently? I mean, there's certain things that knowing what the bidders and the buyers are now looking at in our business, we will do things differently internally, and we have already started to do things differently internally.
A lot of people say until you've done it, you just don't know how hard work it is. Was it 7 months out of your life?
Yeah, well, look, in reality, it was the most intense work I've done in my entire life, and so yes, it was a huge amount of work and effort. But what I would say is it was actually extremely interesting dealing with so many different people, so many different parties. It was intellectually stimulating, but it shines a light on your business that you would never normally get, right? Because you've got literally hundreds of advisors and consultants looking at your business and highlighting things that they think could be done in a different manner and giving their opinions. You might not agree with them all, but it's very interesting.
Fantastic. And thank you, Ian. I think it's a great example of a real success within private equity. And I'm sure that the business will continue to thrive under Permira moving forward. So well done. And thank you so much for sharing your insights. Fantastic. Thank you, Ian. Have a good rest of the day and great to catch up.
Pleasure.